I think another lens to look at this with is the future orientation, because we always show our future as apocalyptic, it feels, and technologically overwhelming and completely disconnected from anything humanity, nature. Like, why is that the only future that we can envision? That's horribly sad. We can dream anything we want as storytellers, and what we're dreaming is uh the city and technology all around us, and nuclear fields and deserts and drought. I would really love it if, our future isn't that man destroyed nature and now suffers the consequences. I would love it if we envisioned a future where man really understood the power of nature and wielded it in such a way that it made our lives so much better, so much more joyous, so much more powerful, so much more meaningful. Where are those futures?
Welcome to the Earth Mates podcast. Together, we explore how to find your path from climate anxiety to community action by asking, who are you? Because just like any relationship, that matters. So get ready to be raw and real, but also playful and silly with me, Chief Relationship Officer Amber Peoples, as we discover what's possible through the lens of the 5 Earth archetypes. Curiosity and subscription buttons highly encouraged. Welcome, friend, to the podcast today. Today, as we record this session, I'm around the 45th parallel, and it is the middle of winter, so I have this cozy sweater on, and I know that Heather is calling in from LA, and so she's probably a little bit warmer, but I noticed we got the long sleeves, and it feels like something that's potentially pettable, and so I'm feeling connected to all of you out there right now wearing something that has that quality to it. Or maybe as you're listening to this, it is the middle of summer, and you are releasing and having your skin feel the sun. And so wherever you are in this moment, whatever time of year it is, we're going to take a 5-second pause. I'm going to count silently in my head and have you feel and experience what it is that is around you in this moment as you're listening to this. And so take a beat, tune in, and here we go. Thank you. Now, as we come back to your listening ears, I am delighted to introduce you to the metaphor type, Heather Fipps. I was first introduced to Heather as she moderated an eye-opening panel at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival called Audiences Want Climate Stories. And the resounding response was, yes, they sure do. We have all kinds of research on it. That's super exciting. And she would know for sure, too, as the senior program director at the Redford Center, where she cultivates opportunities for environmental filmmakers and produces impact-driven media projects and campaigns. Then I got to see her as in full boss mode during the Hollywood Climate Summit in June, where she is a co-founder. Of all the things that amazed me about Heather, I loved that one of her favorite aspects of the event was bringing the people doing on-the-ground climate work into Hollywood to share their stories, because self-determination is the key to storytelling. Stories that show the humanity behind the goals in a time where we don't have clear solutions. So I'm excited to have Heather here today to talk more about the power of story and all things that come about when we view the world from a lens of storytelling and from the metaphor type, and specifically within this environmental climate space. So welcome, Heather. I'm curious to hear if you have another version of this story that you would like to share with folks.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me, Amber. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm so curious to learn more about the metaphor type through our conversation as well. But yeah, I would say, it was a pleasure meeting you. It was just one of these moments where you put your ideas out in the world and people come up to you and share if they resonate. And Amber, you shared that what I had programmed and talked about did resonate with you. And not only does that mean a lot, I mean, I think it was just such a great moment of connection to, it's the value of convening people so that we feel that we're not alone, that we hear ideas that resonate with what we've been maybe thinking about in isolation, but now we've built community. And so just really happy to be in community with you today.
Delightful. Thank you so much. Yeah, that piece about community is so important and really at the heart of Earth relationship. It's that idea of a lot of where these types came from was actually listening to physicist Fritjof Capra, and he was looking at these different definitions of oneness or belonging and connection. And so, I love this idea of first of all, having that impetus to bring what is in your head to the forefront and share it and put it out because you never quite know what's going to happen. But then to hear those places of resonance, those places of community is really such a special place. And especially places like what you were doing when you were bringing different groups of people together to see what could happen in that synergy. And that brings us kind of to where we started in the intro about the storyline about self-determination. And I know that that is a big part about, what you're looking at when you put together the summit and who you chose to have on panels. Also, when you're at the Redford Center and you're looking at stories that you want to share. And I'm curious what more you can talk about when we look at climate stories. How the heck does self-determination fit into that? It almost it doesn't seem necessarily like a no-brainer. It feels like there's some leap to take there. And I'd love for you to help us with that leap.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, there's a couple of different levels that I've come to think about it. The first is in being a documentary filmmaker, there's particularly we have a certain vision of what nature documentaries are, right? And it's usually a film crew goes, films a place, goes and tells a story about a place that they're not from, and really kind of perpetuates an extractive storytelling model of go in, tell a story about a place that you are not necessarily a part of. And there's been some, let's not, you know, I don't wanna tear that down. We've needed those stories, we've needed those points of connection to visualize nature, to visualize, other forms of storytelling, not even just nature documentaries. But I think that in being a storytelling practitioner, you start to really understand the responsibility that you hold when engaging with someone else's story. And you start to ask, if you're an ethical filmmaker, questions about, is this my story to tell? And there's a field-wide discussion happening, about this that is really important to have. And I think it on one level leads us to really understand that there are certain stories that exist, but who deserves to tell them? And that's a form of self-determination. There have been stories that have been told about populations of people, marginalized of all kinds, and some of those stories are wrong. They've painted false images of people, of culture, of gender. And self-determination is the ability to say, that's not my story. My story is this. And I want to correct that through the messages that I'm participating in and the messages that I'm putting out in the world. And so I think self-determination of story origin is really important. I think self-determination also comes through when we talk about climate, because for me, we've been told a story about climate. We've been told a story about climate from people who are trying to perpetuate harm. We've been told stories that we can't exist without fossil fuel. We've been told stories that we're doomed. We've been told stories that there's nothing we as individuals can do, or that individually it is all our fault and not the fault of corporations. And I think it's on us to reclaim that story and take our humanity, self determination into our own hands and say, not only is that wrong, we are going to self determine our future and we're going to imagine a better one. And it doesn't have to be what has been designed, presented to us. It doesn't have to be the story that we are told that we have to exist in. And I think that there's a lot of value in moving, particularly as a climate activist, into a space of I'm not just going to accept what I'm being told, I'm going to tell a different story to myself so that I can keep going. I'm going to tell a different story so that the people that I know need to be involved in this conversation who aren't here have a way to break through and tell their story as well.
Yeah, that's so powerful. That idea of how when we look through the lens of self-determination, it is like I know the work at, let's say, 350 .org, they've done a really good job of cataloging media messages that were fed by the fossil fuel industry. Everything from, carbon footprint to there's nothing you can do, and the doomsday stories of that keep us stuck and then not doing anything. And so this element of self-determination to be able to act and to find a place of um, that energy within yourself. And then also, as you touched on too, that idea of, um, I know this, I think there's even a documentary out right now called Subject, which is all about examining who gets to tell the story of somebody who is the subject of a documentary. And I even, when I attended Sundance last year, I noticed that there were some interesting places where the subject was actually considered one of the co-authors of the documentary, where they were starting to expand upon how is a story being told. And I'm wondering, within this place, because I think what's exciting about that is that so many people enter the climate conversation with kind of a defeatist question, which is, what can I do? Which is really kind of an excuse to do nothing. And so this power of self-determination, I think this is another place that I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about, is this place of, if we don't have clear solutions, because one of the things that's easy to market is a clear solution. Take this pill to lose 50 pounds, do this one little trick and you'll get the person of your dreams. It's such an easy way. But in this realm of where we don't have solutions, how is story helpful in that? How is self-determination helpful in that? Especially as we deal with this thing that we have science behind to know metrics and predictors, but the lived experience of it is unlike anything we can almost even imagine at this point. So I would love to hear how you think story helps with that.
Yeah, this is such a good question, and I hope I can do it justice answer and an overview. But you know, I have come to really understand that when we're looking for solutions here, sure, there can be technical solutions, there can be behavior change, there can be um investable, scalable innovations that can absolutely are essential to help mitigate climate change. But I think what's underneath all of that is, what does it take to shift to that? And when we talk about implementation, adaptation, recovery, all of which are the human side of what it takes to not only move towards solutions, but live in a time of climate change where we will be experiencing climate change and have to navigate what that means culturally in a way that we never have before. What's so much deeper than that is the change that's required of us to grapple with this existential crisis that we don't have answers for, with our sense of self, with our sense of, are we as human beings good for this planet? Are we doing a good job? Am I, how do I fit in? Am I part of the problem? Like, these are very difficult things to wrestle with. And then, especially as you move towards anything that even is a proposed solution, who is it a solution for? It's probably not a solution for everyone. There is more extraction that has to happen to move towards different forms of energy and fuel. There is habitat, considerations to be made. There's just so much change that's required, and you end up in this kind of experience of, do we move quickly because it's urgent? Do we move thoughtfully because we've made mistakes in the past and we need to think about where we are going together before we make any drastic action? And there's so much debate and tension and disagreement that is going to naturally arise from us as individuals, family members, society, community. Nobody has a singular answer. It's impossible to look at a singular solution as buy this instead of that and that. It's just that's so reductive, and that's really reducting us into just consumers and not participants in this whole system that we have built and participate in and are responsible for changing. And so I think story comes into play because I think that the skills that we really need to build are our ability to talk, disagree, be in community, hold community in crisis, um, think thoughtfully about our neighbors as we are making decisions that are best for our community. These are things that stories can and have historically really illuminated for us culturally. And I think that what we need now is actually to strengthen our humanity. That is a solution to be able to live in a world with plurality, where lots of different perspectives can be true at the same time, depending on your lived experience. That's something that's very difficult to hold and understand. We see leaders grapple with this at COP. We see this in policy be one of the biggest conflicts that arises. So if we can't strengthen our approach to understanding that a solution isn't a fix. A solution is a process, and it's one that takes constant um, humanity evaluation, tending to revisiting relationship building. Um, who are we at the end of the solution? I think is a good question for us to be thinking about, and what have we historically thought were solutions that ended up being harmful and ended up being lessons for us to learn from. Those are some of the values of some of the stories that we absorb now, of looking back on our choices as humanity and what could we have done differently, or would do we wish we had done something differently. So there's a lot to be explored, and I think it's getting at something so much deeper than what I think is marketed to us as climate solutions.
Yeah, and I think that designation that you made between consumer and participant is really key because with the solutions, we're often put in that consumer role. Buy these, carbon credits, or choose this food over this food, or things like that. And and I think the piece about the participant piece requires such an interesting level of concerted effort, intentionality, and one of the things that I've been really wondering about that I would love your opinion on is story structure itself. Like when we look at story structure throughout the world and throughout the ages, we can summarize it in a handful of story structures, and it all centers on three words: something versus something, self versus self, self versus other. One that I've been really wondering a lot about is humans versus nature. That is one of the top 7 or so that exist. And I go, "Ok," and I've argued with story consultants about this ongoing because what I'm looking at is there a way to tell a story that is human with nature? And I know that, when we look at story structure, it is that, and even how you described it, it is that what lessons did we learn so we can do it differently now? What different plural ways of looking at it can we have, and do those butt heads to create a versus there? But I'm wondering, with from this lens of story, how can we make stories exciting, entertaining, thought provoking, that somehow replace this versus with a with? And I'm wondering if you think that's even possible, or maybe like I think of examples often would be more like indigenous type stories, like origin stories. Oftentimes don't follow that structure, and so I'm curious to hear your vantage point on that.
Oh man, there's so many lenses you could really look at this through. I love that you've identified man versus nature. That's certainly, when we're talking about narrative shift and narrative change, one that we're really encouraging people to think differently about. And I think it's also reflective of the moment that we're in as people. Right now, we're coming out of an industrial revolution where it was very much the mentality of man versus nature. What can we do to change and survive and modify our world to be better? And um, even the idea of nature. I read this wonderful book called The Invention of Nature, and just this idea that we were a part of nature was like a very new concept for humanity to grapple with, in terms of understanding it's not just, yeah, man versus my environment that I am having to survive. It is, I am a part of nature and I influence it and I actually share a kinship with it, which is very much, we see that in the indigenous worldview that you're speaking about. Um, and so can we do stories about that in an entertaining way? I mean, I think the answer is absolutely yes. And I think it's really about continuing on this line of thinking about the solutions angle. It's like, who do we want to be? What do we want to value? Can our characters and our stories value that? I don't think our stories need to change much. They should stay entertaining. They should explore really complicated questions and relationship tensions. But I think that there's a world in which we just need to reshape the values of what those characters value. And this can be simple materialistic things like, is a giant, perfect suburban house really what's important to this family? Or is a setting in a family vacation in nature an important backdrop of this story, and something that they value? Is the perfect wardrobe and fashion that we're seeing is valuable to a character? Can they have another value system that they're very interested in and exploring? I mean, there's simple shifts like that that I think are very easy for us to think about. It's honestly shocking to me how many characters we see on screen that don't have any environmental values at all that are visible or understandable. But yet, I think socially, when you look around, like you'll go to your friends' houses and you'll see most people have some sort of like sustainability thinking at this point. Most people are feeling the need to do something. Like, why aren't we seeing that value system in the people that we're experiencing as our character friends on screen? So I don't know that much needs to change other than the values of the characters because our values are changing. And I think that's really a starting point. I also just want to say, like, I think another lens to look at this with is the future orientation, because we always show our future as apocalyptic, it feels, and technologically overwhelming and completely disconnected from anything humanity, nature. Like, why is that the only future that we can envision? That's horribly sad. We can dream anything we want as storytellers, and what we're dreaming is, uh, the city and technology all around us, and nuclear fields and deserts and drought. I would really love it if, our future isn't that man destroyed nature and now suffers the consequences. I would love it if we envisioned a future where man really understood the power of nature and wielded it in such a way that it made our lives so much better, so much more joyous, so much more powerful, so much more meaningful. Where are those futures? I would love for people to really shift thinking about what we're envisioning for ourselves.
Yeah, I really love that. So that idea of imagining the future, world building of sorts, that's often talked about in the sci-fi genre for sure. But even, Buckminster Fuller had his world games that were a similar thing, that he invited leaders to imagine, the world 50 years from now, and what would they want? What kind of government and society would they want, the work they're doing now to create? I think what's interesting that is part of this conversation, that I would love to take another step forward in our question about it is, uh, if we look at stories they have to have stakes. That's part of what's entertaining about it, right? That there's something that we want to find out. How do they work through it? How do they get through it? What's at stake? And if you look at, like, let's take reality TV shows. They're going to win $1 million prize. They're going to find the love of their life. They're going to, whatever the case may be, as they go through these different challenges. And what I'm curious about is when we plant these values into our characters because they reflect the majority of people, and when we use our imagination as storytellers to paint potential um, positive futures, what do you think is the underlying stakes of the story that that we can point to? Because to me, it's kind of a no brainer. It's like it's our very survival. It's our it's our very, like, humanity. But that seems a bit too broad, because part of story is you got to get in some of the details and the specifics of the story. So I'm curious how you navigate helping people sharpen that quality of a story around stakes when we're trying to deal with some of these larger existential questions.
Something emotional came up for me when you were speaking about stakes, and I agree. There's the biggest one, of course, which is the future of all society and humanity existing. But I think it's the small things for me that informed my personal stakes being felt in really not being able to focus on very much else in my career and my life, and having to really lean into this. Is that if you've ever stood in a forest that was your childhood home and seen it burn to the ground, that's a stakes. I can never show that to my husband. I can never experience that and heal from that place again and feel those and cherished memories that existed there. If you've ever gone to a beautiful place and experienced a population of animals that was there and you come back and they're no longer, um, that's a loss. That is a stake that feels um, very emotional if you're someone that has a relationship with Earth and with the planet, and nature is a part of who you are and what you need to experience this world in the best version of yourself. So I think that the small stakes, there's also, of course, the stakes of like housing displacement and loss of, history and family. And there's so much that, I think that's unfortunately thinking about the disaster angle of it. But I think there's also this feeling of fighting against systems and what are the stakes of feeling like you don't have control over your own life, and what are the stakes of feeling like you are at the mercy of systems that you can't fight against. And I think everyone can relate to that in some way. You're struggling in a system that is broken and that you feel like it's broken, but you don't know what to do. And what are the stakes that move people to have self determination and do something, even if it's this and something very small and specific in your world, in your community, in your place of what you can do. It's shocking that's not an easy shift for people to make, but if you sit with what that shift in for your what the stakes would take for you to make that shift, I think that's a good place to start. And it could be about climate, but it could be about a lot of different things, because climate is an intersection of broken values and broken systems. So you can follow a lot of lines to get there of what the stakes are.
Yeah, I think that that's really illuminating, that quality, because I know that is a discussion we have a lot within this realm of, as you talked about, not just showing the dystopia, so not just showing the degradation or the destruction, but that idea of systems, I think, is really insightful in regards to, especially since that's how we got here, is we a built sense of systems that so many people think that, well, that's just the way it is, right? It's actually, well, no, it can be changed. But I'm wondering about impact. Because one of the things, especially when we do film, is we talk about impact campaigns. I know with Climate of Awe, I actually have a unique approach because I'm integrating it from the very beginning. It's going to be how we fund it, it's going to be how we distribute it, and who we choose to be in part of it. And all of those elements are from the ground up. And sometimes for some documentaries, it's almost like, whew, we just made it through. Like, we got the funding. Okay, great. Now we can film. Okay, great. And they're kind of these siloed places. And then you get to the impact campaign, and you're almost like, I'm so tired of this film. It's like 7 years later. What do I do now? So
Yes.
I'm wondering, like, what through this process, how do you support creators, storytellers, filmmakers in this potential for impact campaigns?
What I've really come to embrace through a lot of observation and research and case studies and working with a lot of different artists, putting a story out in the world at all has the potential to create an impact whether you intend for it to or not. So, in thinking about impact, it's a holistic approach of how are you responsibly wielding that impact? Have you thought that through? It comes from a place of understanding what you're showing. It comes from a place of who you're amplifying. Are you what to what depth are you telling the truth, or are you um, including people who should be stakeholders in the story that's being told? Um, there's a multifaceted approach to, I think, interpreting what impact means. And I think there will be a certain point in which, um, if you are making a project for an advocacy purpose, there will be a goal and there will be an impact that can be achieved through I'm making this film to do this or to have people and people I will never say that I'm the one voice of what impact means. It's used in so many different ways. For some people, the impact is the emotional resonance that an audience feels, and that is enough, and that's the full conversation. And that's totally fine, and I'll never denigrate that. But I will say that in what I've really learned, particularly through my academic research, is how influential media really is. And we're contributing to collective narrative memory. We're contributing to identity for ourselves. We are contributing to truths, cultural truths. And I think that if you don't think about the impact that your story can potentially have in a positive or a negative way, that is something to really, I think, hold more responsibly in our role as media makers, specifically something that is used so um intentionally for influence at this point. So that's like the first part of the answer. I think the second part of the answer is if you are someone that's creating because you have something to say or something you want to change, wow, what a powerful thing. And your story can unlock some really amazing potential for that to happen. I've seen stories spur conversations between people and communities who had never talked before, and then they mobilized and made a movement. I've seen impact be training policymakers and decision makers and lawyers to think differently about the cases that they're hearing, the policies that they're making. It's stopped bad decisions from happening. It's encouraged good decisions to happen. It is there's so much unlimited potential of what the impact of your film can be, and you can really choose what is important to you in that. Is it building community? Is it reaching certain specific people to have a conversation? Is it mobilizing a movement? Is it shutting something down? Is it building something up? Is it changing where power is being distributed? Like, ask yourself those questions. What is the best version of how this story can influence the world and the issue that I care about? Start there, and then think about and work with people who can tangibly help you think about what that could really look like, who could be involved in that. Um, And I'll just plug one step further, which is there if you are doing a film because you feel something, but you're not doing the advocacy work on the ground, I really encourage you to connect with people on the ground because your film might also be a bridge for people to learn about important work that's happening every day, direct support to those initiatives. And you don't have to solve the world's problems, but you sure can point to people who are working day in, day out to try to do that. And I think we need to think a lot more thoughtfully about ourselves as connectors and bridge builders to important initiatives, people, thought leaders. Um, that I think is another power that is certainly ripe for tapping when we're thinking about impact of our stories.
Yeah, and that connects a lot with work that I know that you've been doing a lot of writing about, which is this element of storytelling and democracy. And I think that last point that you wanted to plug is really a big piece of that is, of the people for the people. And when that comes to, let's say, a climate story, it is, well, who are the people that, yeah, yes, you are a part of it because you are a part of climate, but if you're not touching it every day or having to make some of those large and small decisions about it on a regular basis, you might not know. And that's a movement that's happening throughout the arts, throughout the humanities, throughout governance, is how to listen more. To the people that are more directly involved, because they're going to have incredible insights that from an outside perspective, no matter how much you research, you're just never going to come across. And so I'm curious if there's more to this idea of linking storytelling and democracy that you feel is important to share.
I think that um, equity of whose stories are told is really important to me when thinking about democracy. I think I'm existing in an entertainment system where there are certain films that get tons of financial support and resourcing and attention, and there are films that have to do it all on their own. And I would say that if we want to really truly change the story, of our cultural truths, and I'll expand on that in just a second, but if we really are saying we wanna change the story, that is not going to happen from top-down development. If we have top-down development, we're going to keep creating a monoculture of the same people telling the same stories on of a business model that has proven for business purposes. And I think where we're truly seeing innovation and where we're seeing fresh perspectives, where we're seeing perspectives that, um, are based on lived experience that is coming from artists. And if you know anything about supporting artists, it's a hard journey to be an artist. It's a hard journey to get to a place where you are supported. It is a hard place to get to a place where people, where your work is visible. It's a hard fought, hard won journey over and over and over again. And so I think that that's not dissimilar from feeling like a singular voice in a democracy and wanting to advocate for your community, for your perspective, for your take on what is happening, which could be very, very valuable and unlock a lot of different ways into uh, problem solving. But if you are not heard or you don't have the access, that is hugely problematic for democracy when things lean towards the same decision makers make the same decisions and we all live in the same broken systems. And so I think, first of all, I think there's a really important connection between um, the society and the value system that we are living in has been designed by a certain type of people who have held power for a long time. And if you don't redistribute that power, you will not see different stories and you will not see a different way forward. And so I think that is really important to be thinking about, really understanding the deep connection between DEI initiatives and climate justice. We will not see decisions shift unless we change the decision makers and see different ways of world experiences that can inform what decisions are reached. So that's one thing. And then if you read a lot of screenplays, which I have done as both a teacher and a reviewer and a judge on several, when you start reading and reading and reading the stories and the stories that people are trying to tell, you will really quickly see how many similarities there are between like what I'm going to deem as stereotypes of characters or ways of solving problems or ways of going on these journeys as characters. And you start to realize they may just be cultural truths, but they may not be authentic to what that person they're doing it because they're trying to accomplish a story framework that they know will work, but it may not be that that is their truth. And it's very interesting to me to work with artists and say, what is your truth? What's not the societal truth that you have been told? And we see this arise in tropes, stereotypes, things that we see over and over again. And people will write these things and not even realize that they've written them into their own stories because they've just taken it on as a part of their way of telling a story that feels templatized to them. And I'm just very interested in breaking us out of that. So when I say cultural truths, I mean like these things that are our collective narrative memory. And how do we show new things if we are shaping things to constantly fit a model that is a proven successful business model or proven successful story template. We'll just keep creating those um, layers and layers of cultural truths that we will adapt as truths, but they not may not actually be a truth. They may just be a trope or a stereotype or something that we have been told is the way that things are.
Yeah, that's really insightful because whenever we hear that word truth, we assume, oh, that's the thing, right? And you're
Yes.
encouraging in that moment to be like, well, let's double check. Let's take a moment. Let's take a breath and actually take a look at what we quote unquote know to be true. And so I
Yeah.
really love that. And I love where that kind of leads me into is that when I have these conversations, I also like to look at because we've been talking now for about 50 minutes about all the superpowers that we have as storytellers, and these elements we have to bring to the table, the things that we can add to the conversation, the things that we can be proud of, that we have ways of thinking about. And there's also some things that we need to make sure that we're also on the lookout for and challenging ourselves about through the process. And cultural truths definitely seems like a legit one from this idea of storytelling. And there's a couple other ones I would love if, as you hear them, ways that you've seen them happen in the world and suggestions you have, things that perhaps you've experienced or even working through yourself, depending on your comfort level with that. But kind of some things that I've noticed that people of the metaphor type struggle with is shiny object syndrome. Oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. We were actually joking before we started recording about our to-do lists that were
Yeah.
like just grow by the day of unable time-wise to get to all of them. There's also when you talked about that pressure that artists have to get funding to support themselves to do this work, it also that flip side can be a paralyzing fear of failure, because if you fail, it's so much harder, to we even have terms like the sophomoric effect to describe, with somebody who's trying to get that second edition out of something and they struggle with it, like how that can tank their career. And then also, I think sometimes there is this bias that things that are more scientific, perhaps, or more business orientated, are given so much more credence in this world that there is this bias against those things as trying to rebel against them or their rigidity. And within that, I'm curious to see how you have found ways. I'm seeing you shake your head, so I'm guessing there's some resonance there. But I'm
Yes.
curious ways that you either have worked through some of those things yourself or helped people work through, in all the various amazing ways that you have to support people, and overall comments.
Oh, wow. Well, yes, I mean, I'll just say I've of course have struggled with all of those things on my own journey. And I think the shiny object syndrome That one I have not figured out how to tamp that down. I mean, I just attribute it to I feel like personally I just have an unsatiable curiosity about everything. A I really do just enjoy learning new things all the time. I enjoy coming up with new ideas. I feel like when I am most creative, it is my most healthy and happiest self. So, I do chase creativity and it's hard to finish things. It's hard to see things through when you've got that new pull of, oh, what about this idea now? Or and I also feel like the world is just so overwhelmingly there's just particularly when you get into cause-driven work, there's so much to want to give your heart and attention to, and I think as an activist, it's super easy to burn out, and I think artists are very emotional, and so you also feel that emotional pull and responsibility to everything that you see as interconnected and interlinked, and you just can't possibly give all of your time and energy and attention and work and skill sets to every single thing, no matter how much you feel your heart cracked wide open to do so. And so I think like mediating that and just giving yourself permission to feel, but um knowing that you have to walk your path and do what you can do and focus on the things that you have the power to change and that fuel you. That's the other important thing is like that has to fuel you to stay engaged with it because otherwise you will burn out and get to a really, I think, challenging place to get out of, and you'll find yourself searching for that. So that was a deep departure from your full question, but it's that's hard. I'm still working on that one. I don't have any good answers. If anyone does, send them to me. But I think um the other pieces of fear of failure and struggling as an artist, I can say I very, very much was just so absolutely terrified of failing, of asking for things, of putting my ideas out there as I started as an artist. And I think since I've moved into a role of artist support and an educator, and I really would encourage everyone to mentor or um, teach or try something where you can experience helping others on their artistic journey, and I think you will see so much of yourself, and you will have this kind of, like, really portal experience of going, "This person is incredible, their idea is amazing, they have nothing but, just mountains of aspirations and dreams in front of them, and I'm so excited for them, and yet they're filled with doubt and self-dread and, self-doubt, and they're struggling to see their value, and like you just want to pull that out of them and you want to believe in them and show them that they're the only thing holding themselves back." And then you kind of can pause and go, "Oh, someone advocated for that for me, and that was me, and everyone feels this, and can I take my own advice? Can I listen to what I'm telling another artist to do, which is just go for it, just believe, like, don't worry about what people say." And like if you can almost give advice to take your own advice, that really shifted for me um an understanding of what my fears were and an understanding of how to move forward. And it really usually, I would say most of the time, is facing yourself. I had a very deep fear of asking for things and thinking that I was bothering people or not qualified enough yet or didn't have um enough, in place, that perfectionism. It has to be this perfect package before I show it to anyone. And now I exist in a space where people ask me for things all the time and they're very brazen about it, and they just throw things your way and say, "What do you think about this?" Or, "I'm working on this. Can you help me?" And like it doesn't bother me at all. It's like I start to see, oh, those are the people getting things done. Like my ideas sitting in a box that no one's looking at are not getting done. People that are out there building community, talking about their ideas, being brave enough to share, they're 10 steps ahead of somebody that's sitting there afraid to share. And I know that's not an easy thing to hear. I wouldn't have taken that advice probably 10 years ago. But I know now that it really is about that relationship building and the confidence building in yourself to know that nothing bad is going to happen if you share, I promise. And asking for things and sharing your ideas. Um, at least at early stages, there's a lot of risks to putting your creative work out there, and that's a whole other conversation that everyone has to navigate in their own way. But I think if you just are called to create, I really hope that you do. I hope you do it for your own life experience. I hope you do it for what fuels you. Um, and I hope that you don't let yourself be the only thing that holds you back, because there's a lot of other things that we have to grapple with. But you being your own barrier is certainly the one that I hope every artist gets past.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a huge insight into how to look at that fear of failure is through the lens of getting out of your own way. And I think even more so this piece that you touched on that there's we're kind of near the end of wrapping this up, and there's normally two questions that I ask, and one you kind of walked into with the way that you express this idea of putting your ideas out there and sharing is through relationship. And kind of these last two questions, one that I often ask about is looking through the lens that you look at life and the skill sets you have, how do you view reciprocal relationships? Like you talked about from this idea of mentoring, it's that you are getting actually you're getting a whole new way to look at advice that you need for yourself. And when you're putting your ideas out there, you're potentially building these relationships that can support one another. And so I see reciprocity there. I'm curious if there's anything else that you want to add, either from a human to human reciprocal relationship, or this wider sense of how to look at it from an environmental standpoint as well.
That's a really thoughtful concept. I mean, I think reciprocity for me is deeply grounded in empathy and care. So I think if I can experience care from a relationship, that can mean a lot of different things in different situations. But if I can experience care as a core tenet of a relationship, and if I can give care, that feels very reciprocal to me. I think, it's easy to feel what an extractive relationship feels like if you're not getting any sort of care in return. So I think that's a big part of it for me personally. Um, I forgot the second part of your question. I'm sorry. I think that's
It was just exploring if, because I think one of the things that is curious is you were talking about this idea of care, and you're like, we understand, unfortunately, all too well what an extractive relationship looks
Mhm.
like, and unfortunately, that tends to be the bulk of our relationship with the environment. Is
Mm.
that I've gotten my thing out of it, but what am I how what is the care that I'm giving back to that? And so just curious if you have, especially since you work in this realm of a lot of stories that focus within the environmental or climate space, if there's maybe a story that gave you insight about that, or just a melding pot of an idea that's formed from having the exposure to all these different stories.
The impact piece is really where I see that reciprocal relationship, because if you are telling a story about a place or a community, or you're a part of that community and you're telling that story, I think the care of how will this affect the community? How will this affect this place? How will this affect the outcome of the problem that I am presenting or the conflict that I am presenting? And really, really strongly considering that and choosing your actions carefully as a result of those considerations, that is a reciprocal relationship with the holistic story. Is your film going to cause harm? Is it going to increase traffic in an overly extracted from region? Is it going to uh, affect people's livelihoods, their public appearances, their ability for upward mobility? Or are they getting nothing out of it and you took a story and then they didn't receive anything out of it, that is extractive. And so I think seeing both the more ethical approach to filmmaking and storytelling that's emergent in our field, and certainly considering, the environmental impact that we have, in caring for place and caring for practice and caring for what does it cost for you to do what you are doing, and are you restoring that place? Are you practicing reciprocity? Are you thinking about locally sourced things instead of exports from all over the world and further, extraction? These are all really important questions. I think there's so many different ways to look at our reciprocity. And when you zoom out and think about our reciprocity with the planet, it's all of our choices to think about what is my impact on this place in this time, and how can it be a more positive one than a negative one, and how can I not just participate in a system that I know for certain is negative? What can be my piece of disrupting that, even if it's small? What is my small piece in disrupting that?
Thank you so much, Heather. I know that one of the things, so the last question is a bit of a curveball. So before I throw that curveball here at the end, I do want to preempt it because your answer might be to share with everybody that if you are interested in these topics, if you do want to explore how do we get climate into the stories that are done through Hollywood or other filming means, I would encourage everybody to join Heather and I at the next Hollywood Climate Summit, which is going to be June 24th through the 28th. This summer is my understanding. And so that's super exciting. I'm glad it'll be the 5th annual one, and it keeps getting more of an impact and more people talking and meeting and connecting. And so I preempt with that because the last question that I'd love to ask everybody is, what's something that you wish I would have asked and didn't over the course of this conversation?
Oh my gosh, I don't think I have an answer to that question, because you asked such a really thought-provoking questions. I think it's really just, I think it's interesting to me, even the concept of questions, because I grapple with these all the time. Like, I'll just say I don't think there's any one right way to do anything. And so I just like this idea of continuing to ask questions and having an insatiable curiosity. And I think that's just a really important part of being an artist, of being a storyteller, and of being a citizen in this world, is just continuing to ask questions and really um, continue a lifelong learning journey. And that's just what I'll say about reflections from this conversation. Is I'm still on a lifelong learning journey myself. This is where I'm at right now, but I think these are really thoughtful conversations that you're having, and I really, really appreciate the way that you're really opening up space to think about our relationship with our planet and our relationship with ourselves and each other. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Heather. Such a delight to spend this luxurious hour with you and to share with people listening. And I look forward to continuing to ask questions right alongside you and creating a stronger and stronger community. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, Earthmate. How did that episode resonate? Did it stretch you, inspire you, or perhaps irk you? I'm here for it, so please reach out. Besides the socials, we have a community to practice with on our website, eartharchetypes.com, where more Earth archetypes can guide your path and become dear friends. A great place to start is the quiz to discover your type. Oh, and on your way, I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. See you again soon.